Hey, welcome to the Table at Central. My name is Isaiah,
And I'm George.
and we're here to dive deeper into the themes, story, and culture that are central to our church.
All right. Well, here we are. We just started a brand new message series called In All Things, The Way of Worship. Come on. What do you think this series is about? If it's not self-explanatory.
Finances.
Yeah. It's a series on worship, which I think it goes perfectly with, at least to me, the month of November.
Yeah.
Thanksgiving's coming up, so it's the month of gratitude.
Oh, I see what y'all did
You know
there.
what I mean?
Ah.
You know what I mean? End of year, leading up into the holidays. I'm very excited about this series. I think Pastor Paul did a phenomenal job this past Sunday.
It was great.
Kicking us off. What do you think? What's your first reactions coming into this new series, coming out of Seeds into the way of worship, into in all things the way of worship?
I think it's a natural progression. So whoever sat down and put that together, kudos to you guys.
I wouldn't know.
Great stuff. But I also felt like when you hear worship, everyone normally just thinks like that part of the
Music.
worship service or
Right.
music. Yeah.
Right.
So I love that he went right into, no, we're talking about everything. I mean, in all things, and breaking down what it means to worship God in all things is something that every Christian should consider.
Right.
It feels just as foundational as some of what we spoke about in Seeds. So that's why I think it's such a natural progression.
Yeah.
So as soon as he got to his first point, I said, oh, yep, that's where we going.
Yeah.
Let's get it.
Yeah, I'm excited to dive into this one. I mean, he dropped some nuggets this past Sunday.
Did.
We'll start with worship is putting God in the center of your story. I mean, what does that make you think? I mean, I think that's being a worship leader. I've read a lot of worship books. I've watched a lot of worship podcasts, and I always love seeing different ways of describing what worship is. And this one was a really interesting one. I think pretty often, whenever we're defining worship, it is rightfully so. It's a lot about God. What I like about this definition that Pastor Paul gave is that it includes us in a way, and I think that there's room for both. I think it's not one or the other, right? It's both and. And so what I like about this one is that it's a unique definition that kind of includes us. It's putting God in the center of our story.
Yes.
Acknowledging that we have a story, acknowledging that we have a part to play, but also acknowledging that God is the center of it. He's the most important part of it. What does that make you think of?
Yeah, I think you breaking that down when it comes to this whole like glass half empty, glass half full perspective of worship. What I also love is if he has to be at the center, then we have to also address the things in the place of worship that are taking that center before we put him back into that space.
Right.
And I love that definition because I can count on my fingers if we're talking music, if we're talking about the worship part of a morning service,
Right.
where there's a surrender in the middle of a song. The lyrics of a song will talk about letting go of things, or nothing else could do what Jesus does for me or what Jesus has done for me. And I think sometimes we think that's just like a platitude, like surrender is just something we do as Christians because that's just a Christianese buzzword.
Yeah.
But it's actually so crucial. We can't live a recentered with God at the center of our story's life without admitting that there are other things that we first will go and worship.
Yeah.
And that's a heavy statement, I
Yeah.
think. Saying you worship something is no light thing.
Yeah.
But how many of us are actually worshiping things right now, for whatever reason? Maybe it's out of fear, for a desire or control. So I was like, yeah, man, you setting it off with that phrase.
Yeah.
That's where we going,
Right.
man. Let's do it.
Yeah, I like the call to attention that he gave of what is at the, if it's not God, then what is at the center?
Yes.
And he talked about how if it's not God, if it's something else, it creates an unstable life. If it's your kids, if it's your your spouse, if it's your job, if it's anything else but Jesus, it creates an instability in your life, which I think is very, very interesting in the topic of worship.
Yeah.
Right? Like
Yeah.
I think it makes it very personal for us, the role that worship plays in our lives. And it's so true. You know, I can
Absolutely.
think back on seasons of my life where I didn't do a great job of keeping Jesus at the center of my life, and there was other things that were Jesus adjacent.
Yeah.
It's not even like well, it was drugs, or
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
it was like even just church, you know, like
That's big.
being at church, like being a worship leader as opposed to just, just worshiping him. You know what I mean? Like,
That's real,
so
man.
even Jesus adjacent things that we put at the center can still create some instability. Like I love that point that if we keep Jesus at the center, if he is the foundation, that it's a strong foundation, and anything else is unstable.
That's right.
You know, what is that?
Yeah.
Can you think of times in your life where
Oh, yeah.
maybe you didn't
Sure.
have Jesus at the center?
Easy, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just think back in college when I was trying to figure out who I was, and I think a lot of the beliefs that I had about myself were scrambling to believe those against the voice of a lot of lies, like you're not enough. And when you have these lies that kind of like are in your head, and you maybe are fooled to believe sometimes, those are the moments when you will make fleshly things hallowed things, you know? So the attention of a girl, or even if it was a good relationship, even if we were trying to have a God-centered relationship, there was a large amount of the affirmation from her that was very important, you know? And then you also, what's crazy about this concept too, as we keep going, is a lot of times we go after the same kind of thing, just like looking different. It looks different in different seasons.
Right.
You know, that attention point and feeling like I'm enough for someone, that is the constant in my life that I feel like I've always fought against, and fallen into the pit of worshiping. And so when I think about the fact that God says that I am enough, and it's not because of anything that I've done, but because of what Jesus has done for me, that is just one of the hardest things to believe sometimes. And I know I'm in a posture where God is at my center and really is the center of my story, when I'm almost like, I believe it and I don't know how. Like I'm in a season where I believe it, or I'm around people who help me believe it, or I'm walking in a space, taking a risk in a place, and I don't know how. It's a thing by faith. I feel like the fleshly ways we try to put things at the center of our story are often hoping for like a tangible feeling, or something that feels like, okay, I actually am doing this. I'm manifesting something myself. There's some level of control that I have here. But when Jesus is at the center of our story, kind of like none of that actually exists at all. We're relinquishing all control completely. And so I would say, that's where I've seen it area-wise for me.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about this concept too is that, you know, we're saying that we're putting Jesus at the center of the story, but it doesn't mean that there's nothing else that's a part of that story.
No, not at all.
It's just that everything revolves around Jesus.
Exactly. It's like he's the sun, and then everything else is solar system orbiting.
Yeah, I love that concept, you know. And I think that's like where it gets kind of interesting with, like, you know, a lot of modern worship songs where we're singing things like nothing else, and we're singing things that are, it's like we're saying things that it's only Jesus, and it's true. And I think that should be our heart posture. Like Jesus on him by himself should be enough for us.
Yes.
But you know, in the practical everyday life, like, we also have to sit with this reality that yes, it's Jesus, and that's why this concept is so important, because he should be at the center. But obviously, there's other things to life.
Yeah, man.
There's careers, and there's family, and there's
things to succeed at.
There's so many things. And so it's such a good way to begin this series of worship by establishing, like, no matter what we talk about, this is the center. This is the point. This is the end all be all.
Yeah.
It's Jesus.
Yeah.
And everything I've just seen, you know, especially in my life, I've just seen how when I do keep Jesus at the center, it just seems like everything else seems to just kind of settle in.
Yes.
When we allow God to be at the center and we actually make an effort to put him at the center, it just seems like, I'm not saying things are perfect, but everything else seems to take care of itself. Or maybe not of itself, but like God, because you're making him the center, He's got you.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
absolutely.
And I think that's such a beautiful thing, that we serve a God that when we choose to put him in the middle, when we choose to make him the center of our lives, that he's so graceful to take care of everything else.
Yeah,
when we choose to put our focus on God and be completely focused on him, he's such a kind and faithful God, and he's such a good father, that as we're pointing our attention to him,
Yes.
he's taking care of us.
All the other
He's taking
things.
care of all the other things.
That's right.
And it requires a little bit of faith, but I think it's a really special thing to be in that space of, I think it takes some spiritual maturity to reach that point.
It does, man, and sometimes, there goes the grace as well. I think we get lost a little bit in the journey sometimes, and it's like,
Yeah.
Jesus himself knew about that. We've talked about this in the past, this idea of the success he saw on an earthly sense while doing the very spiritual ministry that he did in his time. He knew to pull himself away when he needed to separate himself to make sure that the center of his story was always the Father. That was something that he gave us an example of.
Yeah.
And I think, it reminds me, what you're saying reminds me of that Psalm verse where it says, delight in me and I will give you the desires of your heart, right? Like this whole idea that sometimes we worship only because we want certain things, and I think that Pastor Paul talks about that too. He talked about what was the line we said? No, he was trying to bar it out.
Is he
sublime or
the
is he the sublime? Yeah. Is he God over me, or is he just God like beside me as an accessory, as an assistant to what I've got going on? And when we have a true heart of worship, when we delight in him first and foremost, not only does he give us what we want, but like when it says he gives us the desires of our heart, he gives us new things that we want inside of our heart. Is really what that verse is breaking down to. Yeah. And I think like that is what you're saying. It's like, okay, I want to fix all these things and put my hands on all these peripheral things. And God's like, nah, just focus on me. Yeah. And then we realize I'm not even stressed out about the things. Yeah. And that was really the real reason why I wanted my hands on it in the first place. Exactly. It's because I'm afraid I won't leave something behind. I'm afraid I'm going to be just like my mom made me feel like I was when I was a kid. I'm afraid that what those bullies said about me are actually true. Like God's like, nah, I'm not worried about any of those lies. Rest in what I say is true about you. Right. It's insane that that's also a part that plays in the worship. Right. Like I'm good, and because I'm good, you're good too. Just trust me. So
there's something like, I don't know, something about the presence of God that I think when you move from, and I think we've talked about this on the podcast before, but like the spiritual maturity that it requires from, I think it was in the context of faith, but I think it's the same thing with worship. It's like, there's the level of worship where we're worshiping kind of based off of our experience, right? So we're worshiping God based off of, I've seen him be faithful, and so that's why I worship him, which is good. I think that's a very important space for us to worship from. Sure. But then there's this, I would say it's like this next level that we should strive for, where we have a revelation of who God is. Yeah. That is not, it's not just determined by the speck of dust that my life represents in the span of eternity. Ooh. And so you start moving from just like, well, I worship him because he's been good in my life. But I think the more that you worship God and you're in his presence and you press in and you choose to make him the center, you start to learn more about him and you start to see him more, and you realize like, this is way bigger than just my life. Like he's just so magnificent and so beautiful and so worthy to be worshiped, that it's not just a revelation of my personal experience with God, but it's a revelation of who he is, and it's just so overwhelming that I can't help but just worship him.
Yeah, that's good.
And I that's my hope for people during this series, is that we move from this. It's a good place. It's a good thing to worship God from a personal experience of him being faithful. I think it's so powerful. It's necessary in the church. It's necessary for us to sing songs of testimony. It's so important, and it's very powerful. But if we can move into this space of like, I'm just in awe of God, not just for what I've seen in my life, but just like I have a revelation of who he's so holy.
Yeah.
He's so worthy.
Yeah.
And it has not, it like really has nothing to do with my life. When you put it into that perspective, like it allows you to disconnect from the worldly reasons to worship. There's like an eternal implication to this whole thing.
Yes.
Because we're connecting with heaven and we're worshiping the way that the angels worship, and they're always singing holy, 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 right?
Yeah.
And so I'm no longer just worshiping because of how he was faithful to me this past week.
Yeah.
There's like this whole eternity aspect that I get to exist in this little piece of it.
Absolute.
But the reason why I'm worshiping is not rooted in just like my current reality.
Right.
It's like this greater, bigger, something that I can't even fathom.
Yeah. It's like you know, I'm a movie guy, you know that.
Go for it.
Like Oppenheimer, like a really good soundtrack, something that really pulls you in.
Yeah.
You get this grand. Can you feel the music, or can you hear the music? Like I can hear the music in everything that God is doing.
Yeah.
Because of the fact that I've developed beyond just that initial point in my faith.
Yeah.
And I think that when we talk about in all things, you can't even understand what we're saying when we say in all things until you're willing to expand how many places there are and how many ways that we should worship the Lord outside of just the 30 minutes of a worship service, or outside of the stereotypical, you know, like this isn't me saying don't read your Bible, but like some people will strictly do what they were taught to do when they were in Sunday school, which is just read the Bible and do these little things. But no, I'm telling you, I've met the Lord on a walk. I've met the Lord in a podcast conversation. I've met the Lord looking at my daughter playing with her toys. I've met the Lord in the grace of my wife's hug. Like I've met the Lord. Like I try to worship him on all those things. And I recognize, and I try to recognize the moments when I'm letting the grid of this first world's, this like small little blip of time be what I see life through, instead of Jesus actually being my reality. And then from that grid, I see and have a paradigm of eternity. Like that's something that's really hard to grasp. And I want to ask, if you're saying that you go from one point to getting to this place, what do you think stops some people from being able to kind of get to that and shift in that maturity? Is it a thing of time and time alone, or is there stuff that sometimes inhibits us from being able to journey in that maturity of the worship experience?
I think it's a mixture of things. I think there's a time aspect of it, but I don't think it's limited to that. You know, you could have met Jesus last week, and, you know, who's to say that you can't have that experience, right? Yeah, I think it's also it can be a time thing. Like the more that you do it, the more that you learn, the more that you grow closer to God. Sure. But I was gonna say, before you even asked, I was gonna say none of this is possible without that first point, like without putting Jesus at the center.
Yeah, that's
right?
so
Like,
true.
like all those examples that you shared of the ways that you've met the Lord, that you've felt His presence. It's not possible unless He's the center.
Yeah.
Because if He's not the center, like, it's gonna be very difficult for you to experience His presence in those other hidden small places. It'll be pretty easy for you to come into church and be in the environment that is conducive for the presence of God, and it's great and it's powerful, because you're going to be around it. But what about those everyday moments?
Exactly.
Yeah, like I think it's absolutely vital that He is the center in order for you to be able to reach that. And so then
100%.
it leaves you with these practical steps that you can take in order to do that.
Yes.
And it's I think, right, we're not saying don't
Not
read your
to do-
Bible.
Yeah, no, do the basics.
But it starts there, going back to our seed series. Like, it starts in those little things that we do, and it grows. But I think the more that you spend time in that place with God, the one-on-one, where you slow it down and you quiet down and you make this decision to, all right, God, here's 15, 20 minutes, here's 30 minutes, here's an hour.
Yeah.
I want to focus on you.
And it's that thing that we talk about all the time about seeking His face instead of seeking His hand in that moment as well. 100%. Like we have to be willing to set that time up, not just in the moments when I very much need Him because my life's falling apart. Like, that's good. Yeah, we need that. But how quick do we forget about him when we on top?
Right.
How quick do we forget about him when we were winning?
Yeah.
How quick when it's all going the way we
Yeah.
want it to, the way we expect it to.
Yeah.
like-
That's why it's like a discipline. Like worship is like a
Yes,
discipline.
Yes. That's
So
it. That's the word.
It has to be this ongoing thing. And so, yeah, it starts with that quiet time. And I think it can be a mixture of time, but it's also just like your mindset about it.
Yeah.
You know, like I think that I just believe that you're able to experience God in that way because you've just made up you've made up your mind
made
that
up my mind.
I want to experience God in that way.
Yeah, that's good.
And I think that it will come down to a lot of people during this series to just like, and I think Pastor Paul kind of talked about it, like helping people move along. He says the phrase move the needle.
Move the needle.
On this, and I think that'll be a big shift for some people is making that decision of like, yeah, I want to start experiencing God outside of the worship set on
stereotypical-
Sunday.
Yes.
Like you have to make that decision for yourself.
Yeah, that's good. Man.
God is ready. God is on the edge of his seat for us to experience him in a different level. I think that's something that's very important for us to understand. Is that we don't have to beg for it.
That's good.
God is just like ready. He's like, oh please seek me.
Let's go.
Like please seek me outside of the Sunday morning, and I'll show you. Like he's so ready. I think we need to understand that first is that he's not trying to hide himself, and he's so available and he's eager. He's eager for us to find him in the little moments in our life.
To meet us in all things.
He's so eager. And so then it's up to us, like, okay, I need to seek him. I need to seek him when I'm holding my daughter. I need to seek him when I'm holding my wife. I need to seek him when I'm on the way to work and I'm driving and I'm stuck in traffic.
You're going
Go for it,
crazy.
go for it,
No,
go
you're
for it.
going crazy when Paul talks about worship being active. That's what you're saying. That's what he means. It's an observable expression, right? And I think like I just think about when I got married and everyone was like, you two will do great because remember, it's not just you two in the relationship. It's God's at the center. And so it's the three of you. And you get these cheesy Christian-y statements.
Yeah.
So true. They're not,
Right.
It's not that they're not true, but within a immature perspective of worship, I think just her loving God and me loving God is enough. No, that's a passive concept in some ways, but to actively say that God is the center of our relationship is for me to actively ask God to show up through my marriage and to actively keep my eyes open for when God is teaching me something.
Yeah.
But the thing about being active in that is that we want to be picky choosy on when we're going to do it.
Right.
So when I'm having an argument with my wife and she's not seeing things the way I want her to see it, I forget the fact that God could be speaking to me with a perspective that's different than mine through my wife.
Yeah.
Because the way I see it is the way I see it. And that clues me in even more to some other places where there's still something that's more center in my story than God himself.
Yeah.
Even if I'm quick to not engage in an argument or quick to not voice my opinions out of fear, again, back in this point of not being accepted or being on my own, feeling alone in my perspective, these are still cluing me into places where I'm afraid. And I think of how Jesus' most stated thing in his time in his ministry while he was here on earth was fear not.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's going to be points in this series where the idea of fear and what we are afraid of is a direct antagonist to our willingness to, by faith, worship.
Yeah.
And so I think like that's something for us to be clued in on, paying attention to amidst this time too, as a congregation, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Where is these places of fear? Because, if we boil fear all the way down, what is it really? It's usually a thing of death.
Yeah.
I'm afraid that, your opinion of me will die. I'm afraid that my control on the situation is gonna die.
Yeah.
I'm afraid that all the things that I've done to make myself look like I'm a proper individual that has his life together is going to die.
Yeah.
But what did Jesus come to defeat? He came to defeat death.
itself.
Death itself.
Yeah.
What am I really afraid of? Why am I afraid to worship God for who he is with all of my highs and all of my lows, all of my things that are insecure and all things that I am secure with and in? I feel like there's a lot of people who pull punches, man. They pull punches in that area. And I'm hoping that this series doesn't just teach us how to worship, but I think we're going to become more than conquerors in more ways than we've ever imagined because of that concept of worship deepening for us.
Yeah, hopefully it'll become more of a a more common response for all of us.
Yeah, man,
That
absolutely.
that it'll move up on the list of how to respond to anything in life, because it's like it seems to be, and from experience, I'm no expert. Like, it is very easy for worship as a response to kind of be moved down the list whenever we're in the thick of it. It just seems like we desire to worship when it's the most convenient or comfortable.
Ooh.
But if we can grow spiritually and be challenged and make that more of our response in all things,
Yeah.
like actually in all things,
Yes, that's it.
in all things, it's so powerful. And yeah, that's where the more than conqueror aspect comes in. It's that it's not that you become a better fighter. It's not that. It's just, what is your response when the going gets tough? Well, I'm gonna worship. Like, I'm gonna pray.
Yeah.
I'm gonna seek God.
I'm seeking.
It also reminds me of what Pastor Paul was talking about, how the going from earth to eternity, and how the transition will be smooth, because I'm gonna be doing in eternity what I was already doing while I was here on
Yes.
earth.
Oh, that was such a
That
good
that was
point.
great.
He was
like,
cooking.
yeah. So if I'm worshiping now, so that I every knee will bow, every tongue will confess. Like, for me, it's gonna be no different. For other people, it's gonna be kind of a shock.
Dang, my knees hurt.
But that's not gonna be the first time that I'm worshiping.
Right, yes.
It's gonna be a smooth transition for me, because I'm gonna die worshiping, and I'm gonna end up in heaven
man.
still worshiping, and I'm gonna be doing so into eternity. And so that's why I bring up this concept of like, there has to be this this thought process about worship that is greater than the earthly experience that we have.
Yes. Yes.
Like, it is connected to something much
so
greater.
much greater, bro.
And that's also what I hope that people, that are maybe new to all of this, and this is all kind of like, what are we even talking about? That we can wrap our minds around it a little bit more as we go through this series. How it's not just this earthly experience, but there's something about joining with heaven when we're worshiping.
Yes, man.
That makes it so powerful, and that there's a transformation that happens in us when we choose to almost zoom out from the earthly worries and stresses, because in comparison to eternity, all of these things that sometimes feel so
massive,
yeah, so impossible,
yeah,
so unbeatable. When we when we get into the presence of God and we zoom out and we turn our eyes from all of these things, the things that keep us up at night, and we turn our eyes to Jesus and we make him the center, all of these things just all of a sudden become so small.
Yeah.
In the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
I'm looking at Jesus and I realize how powerful he is.
Yeah.
And how beautiful and how wonderful he is. And all of a sudden, all these other things are just like, yeah, you got it.
You got it.
I'm going to worship you. You got the rest.
You trumped the.
Like, you are just so much greater than all of these things.
You're
That's such a freeing revelation.
Let's talk super practicality on the back end here. That feeling.
Yeah.
Can you tell? Let's do stories. I want to hear a story of a time when something like that happened for you, where you had a moment where Jesus was greater than the thing that you felt.
It's a story
was
of, story of my life.
But get practical.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll go first.
You go
that's
first,
why
yeah.
I guess I'll use the example. So, college days, I already told y'all, girlfriend drama, right? And it was the biggest deal because I felt like it was a lot of what I would go through relationally was very tied to lies and truths I was trying to believe about myself at that time and figure out and navigate identity-wise as a man of God. And my uncle, he lived I went to school up in upstate New York, and my uncle lived in Manhattan, on the west side of Manhattan, right off the Central Park.
Yeah.
And he used to invite me over to his apartment, and he would be like, look, after you're done with class on Friday, like, just take the train, come down. And he used to really encourage me, like, go take the train. Like, I know you're like worried about how you're gonna get here, and I was like afraid to take the train. Like that's where I was as a young adult. I would take the train and I would go into the city, and I'd come out the subway or hit Grand Central Station, and I'd see all the people, and you feel the feeling of being one person in a city of so many people, like one story in a sea of a ton of stories.
Yeah.
And I make my way trying to figure out how to get to his house, and I get to his house off the subway, and I'd spend time there, and all of these massive emotional things that I would deal with at college felt so small, bro. They felt so small because of this journey I took
Yeah.
and the way that I was humbled by that journey itself. And I felt like God would draw so near to me by this retreat
Yeah.
of a move that I would make, and it would help me to come back to the college, to the campus. And it's not like the things went away. They're still there. It's
Yeah.
just I'm not the same.
Yeah.
I'm not the same as I was when I left on Friday.
Right.
I have a completely different perspective on these things. And I have a closeness to the Lord that helps me have a confidence while navigating these things, whether it's a hard thing or a good thing. I feel like those retreats they shaped me a lot in
Yeah.
terms of my framework for what it means to journey with Christ
Yeah.
and to worship him and look for him.
Yeah.
I guess I never put it in words until you just explained it like that, and I realized that's where I used to
Yeah.
feel that feeling the most.
It was kind of like getting away.
It was getting away, but it was that 30,000-foot view and realizing that all of what I thought was so big is nothing compared to
Yeah.
who God is. And I'm not that big. My
Right.
story doesn't why do I think my story is the most tremendous thing in the entire world when the weight that Jesus carried is so much bigger
Yeah.
than anything I could ever carry?
Yeah.
That gives me confidence to conquer, because if he can conquer that, then I can conquer this. And if he's bigger than that, then why am I so stressed about this little thing?
Yeah.
And that way of worship and all things in that regard, it changed me, man. It
Yeah.
changed me. I don't think I'd be who I am without those seasons of life.
Yeah.
And I was 21, man.
Right.
2021. So that's a story for me. But for you,
I like that you said, those things were still back in college.
Oh, of
Like
course.
you would retreat, but there were, and so for me, I don't think any of this is necessarily. It's not an escape. It's like we're
that's good.
not pretending like worry isn't real. We're not pretending like stress doesn't exist. We're simply having a revelation that God is greater than all of these things. And in contrast to all of those things, God is so much bigger. And therefore, it disarms a lot of the worry and a lot of the stress, a lot of the anxiety.
Come on, man.
So I'm not pretending like none of it is real, and God isn't either.
Right.
I am simply turning my attention from how big these things seem and how great my God actually is. And so I'm just going to worship you knowing that you are greater than all of these things. I'm not
Sheesh.
escaping these things. I'm actually, in a way, running towards them
towards them.
while I'm running towards you, knowing that you're going to take care of me. And that has been my reoccurring story, which almost feels silly because it's like, man, have I not learned?
Right.
But that's just a human experience. It's
Yeah,
like
bro.
do we ever really get it?
Yeah.
I think it's like this ongoing thing.
Yep.
I'm very, and I've said it before, I'm very stubborn.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to going through things with God, I know God knows I am stubborn, and I
So
wrestle with
stubborn,
God.
bro.
Like I don't just like, it's like with me, it's never been like God said this and I'm just like, okay.
Sounds good.
Yeah, like I've just always been like,
Yeah.
what do you mean by that?
Yeah, bro.
Let's talk about it.
Mm.
There's always been this wrestle. And so I guess it's the surrender part has always been difficult for me. But I remember pretty early on, I mean, I was in high school, and I started just dealing with a lot of mental health stuff, a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression. And I remember having a moment with God in my bedroom where I was just like, I think I was just kind of fed up because I was doing the whole church thing. I was doing the whole, going to youth group. I was very involved at church. I've always been very involved at church. It just didn't seem like all these things that I was doing was getting the results that I wanted because inside I felt this turmoil, right? And so there was this gap between where I was and where I thought I should be due to the things that I was doing. And that also seems like a reoccurring thing in my life. I've seen you have the realization, but I'm telling you, it's like I wrestle with God. Like I just don't lay down easy, like I want to wrestle with
That's
God.
real, bro.
And that's just me being real. And I also have a lot of peace in the fact that God has a lot of patience with me.
I think God loves wrestling with you.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that's like what makes my relationship with God so special between me and him, is that like it's just real. It's proven. It's weathered, because I wrestle with him. I don't take things at face value. I'm just like, no, I want to. If I'm gonna believe, I want to believe for real.
Yeah, man.
And it's gonna go through a storm, and it's gonna be like my faith is gonna be weathered. You know what I mean? And so I just remember having this moment where I was just like yelling out to God, like, "Yo, where are you? You know, I go to church, doesn't seem like you're there. I come home, sure as heck not here. Like, where are you? Like, you said you wouldn't leave me. Like, why do I feel this way?" And I just remember I've never experienced the audible voice of God, but that was one of those moments where I just knew he was speaking. Like, it was this like gut feeling.
Gut, yeah.
And he was just like, I've always been here. And it seems like such a simple, like, oh, well, that's cute. But it was less about what he said, and it's more about I felt the weight of his presence. It was like this, like something washed over me. And I can feel it even right now. Like, it was just like this, the Bible says peace that surpasses all understanding. Like, that was that moment.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, like, and none of the things that I was struggling with necessarily disappeared.
No.
I just had this like realization of he's so close, and he's so faithful, and he's so good, and he's so powerful.
Yeah.
And all of those things all of a sudden were disarmed. And it taught me a little bit about faith, but more importantly, it taught me about the importance of being real with God, so that God can become real in my life. Right? Like, I had to keep it real with him so that I could continue having the revelation of how real he is in my life. I was talking about, I've said it a couple times at discipleship track that we've been doing, is just how important it is to have that revelation of who God is in our lives, because whenever there's times in our lives it's going to happen where we feel like God is far away.
Yes.
Like, it's going to happen. It's going to happen where it just, your feeling is something different than what your faith says, right?
Yes.
The feeling is like, right now it feels like God is far away from me. It feels like I don't feel God. I come to church, it doesn't feel like God's around. I now know, because of that experience and many others that followed, because of how much I wrestle with God, I just know now that every time I feel that, it's not God running away from me. It's not God walking away from me. It's an invitation for me to draw closer.
Oof. This man is just going
and
crazy,
I just have to believe that every single time when I start to feel that way, like, all right, I'm looking around, God, where are you? You feel like you're pretty far away. It's not God. It's not that he's left me. I take that as an invitation. I feel like he's saying, yeah, come closer. Step forward. Go into your place. Seek me. Seek my face. And some of the most powerful spiritual growth that I've had have come from those places where, though I feel like God is far away, I'm choosing to approach him with confidence.
Yeah.
And I choose to worship him.
Yeah.
And I'm able to experience him in a whole new way.
So good, bro.
And so I hope that this is an encouragement for people that they may be feeling it right now. They've felt it in the past. They probably will feel it in the future. This distance between you and God, and you're like, how do I even keep him at the center when sometimes I feel like he's not there?
He's not there.
It's an invitation.
It doesn't feel tangible.
It doesn't feel real, and I think that's okay.
That is okay.
It's okay. You're gonna be fine.
That's right.
Just remember, it's an invitation for you to draw closer, for you to just slow down. Like, it's one of those moments where, like, oh, I don't feel God.
Yes.
Maybe there's a lot of distractions.
Maybe
It's not that God has walked away from me. Maybe it's just there's a lot going on, and I just need to recenter.
Yes.
I need to realign. I need to recenter. I need to put him back in the center of my life, and I need to slow down and take a moment and connect with him and pray and just have some quiet time. And I think that goes a very long way in our spiritual journey.
It's crazy. It's crazy how when it doesn't feel like he's real or close, that's when we do the most manufacturing. That's when we start looking for the most
Exactly.
fake stuff.
Yeah.
Stuff that's so fake.
Well,
so
yeah, we're
hollow.
trying to fill the void,
Yes.
and we take it as like, okay, God's not there, so I have to fill this void with something else. But it's like, no. That's the time where you double down.
Yeah, man. Yes.
That's the time where you double down. You remember that you made a decision.
Yes, you
That's the
did.
time where you have resolved to seek God.
That's right.
And those who seek God will find Him.
That's right.
That's a promise, and we need to go back to what the Bible says, what the Word of God says. You seek Him, what? You're gonna find Him.
Knock and the door will open.
Knock and the door will be open. Ask and you shall receive. Like I have to keep that burnt in my heart.
Come on.
For the moments where I feel like God is far away.
Come on.
For the moments where I don't really feel like worshiping.
Yes.
No, He's at the center of my life. He's so near, even though I don't feel it. So I'm gonna seek Him, knowing that it is promised to me. It is guaranteed.
It's guaranteed.
It is not. It's not chance. It's not luck. It's not a gamble. Nope. It is promised that if I seek Him, I will find Him.
That's good.
In all things.
That's good. Yeah, man. I mean, that's how Pete Paul ended it yesterday.
Yeah.
He said Martha Stewart, her going to jail might have been a good thing for her.
The best thing, yeah.
Why? Because when we're broken, when we fall apart,
Yeah.
when we're in those dark nights of the soul where it feels like God is far, those tend to be the most when it comes to transformation, when it comes to changing your life, when it comes to deepening your relationship with Him, those are the seasons that do that, man.
Yeah.
Oh, sheesh, bro. It's crazy. I feel like we're going to have a lot of great conversations when we talk about In All Things, the way of worship, the way I think we are going to do a lot of deconstructing of what people may think the way of worship is as we truly look at the Word and talk about our experiences, the culture of our church, the stories of the people left and right of us. I can't wait, man.
Yeah,
this is gonna be so cool.
It's gonna be a great series. I'm very excited. Like I said, I've been looking forward to this for a minute, and I think, like I've said before, there's a big transformation that happens in our lives when we truly understand the role of worship in our lives. And even just like the putting God at the center, like that alone is such a powerful thing.
Easy.
That if all of us can do some work to do that, that will bring so much growth to our spiritual life, which is important, but it's not the most important. What's most important is we're connected to God.
Yeah, man.
Like we're seeing God, we're hearing God, and I'm hoping that the people that have been feeling like, I've been doing this church thing, I'm not sure if I feel super connected to God.
Man, yes.
I hope that this is going to be the month, this is going to be the series that some things click in their minds and they make some decisions and they choose to just seek God regardless of how they feel, and they walk out on the other end growing closer to God.
Yeah, I hope they feel challenged by this, and then they are able to find the courage to rise to that challenge in this regard. Yeah. It'll change their lives.
It is. I mean, it's changed our lives, and it's going to change, I believe it's going to change a lot of lives here at Central Church. So super excited for this series. Great conversation today. Good to have you back. We missed you last week.
Shout out Justin, though.
Shout out Justin. But hey, we'll see you next week at the table.